Hey guys, tonight we slip into the quiet, candlelit world of 17th-century Quakers, where peculiar punishments were born from a fierce devotion to simplicity and truth. Picture yourself in a muddy English village, the air thick with wood smoke, as somber men and women in plain gray cloaks gather in a barn. They're not here to gossip or bicker, they're Quakers, and they're about to decide someone's fate for breaking their sacred rules. You're standing among them, feeling the weight of their silent stares. Spoiler, you probably won't survive their judgment without squirming. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the 1640s, and England's a mess. Think less charming countryside, and more everyone's arguing about God and taxes. The Quakers, formerly the Religious Society of Friends, are just starting to stir. They're not your average churchgoers. These folks believe everyone carries an inner light, a direct line to the divine, no priests required. Sounds nice, right? But here's the catch. That belief makes them rebels in a world obsessed with hierarchy. You're walking through a marketplace, hearing whispers about these oddballs who refuse to bow to nobles or swear oaths. Their whole vibe screams defiance, but they're not loud about it. It's a quiet, stubborn kind of revolution. Now, let's get to why their punishments were so peculiar. Mainstream fact: Quakers rejected England's state church, which made them targets for fines and jail time. But within their own tight-knit groups, they had to keep order. If you messed up, say, by gossiping or wearing a flashy hat, they didn't just scold you. They invented creative ways to nudge you back to their path of righteousness. One quirky tidbit: some Quaker communities would make you stand in a meeting house, silent, while everyone stared. No whips, no chains, just the crushing weight of collective disappointment. Imagine you're there, your cheeks burning as 30 pairs of eyes bore into you. Historians still argue whether this was kinder than the era's usual punishments, like branding or flogging. Was it mercy or just a different kind of harsh? You're starting to see the Quaker mindset. They're not about physical pain. They're about shame and reflection. Picture yourself as a young Quaker, maybe 20, who accidentally cursed during a heated barter. The elders don't yell. They invite you to a meeting for worship. You're expecting a lecture, but instead, they sit in silence, waiting for you to confess. It's eerie, like being grounded by ghosts. Joke number 1. If you think modern group chats are passive-aggressive, try a Quaker silent stare down. Their punishments weren't just about fixing bad behavior. They were about saving your soul, one awkward moment at a time. Let's linger on their core belief: equality. You're in their world, where a farmer's voice matters as much as a scholar's. This is radical for the 1600s, when most folks think God picked the king himself. But equality comes with rules. If you act prideful, say, by buying a fancy velvet coat, you're not just vain, you're betraying the group's values. So, they might advise you to wear it inside out in public to show humility. It's not torture, but good luck keeping your dignity. Another quirky detail: some Quakers kept punishment logs, like a proto-spreadsheet of who got shamed and why. You're flipping through one now, seeing entries like John for loud laughter, to sit quietly 1 hour. As you wander this village, you notice the tension. Quakers are surrounded by enemies: royalists, Puritans, even neighbors who think they're weird. Their punishments aren't just internal. They're a way to prove they're disciplined, not chaotic, to a skeptical world. Joke number 2. Imagine explaining to your non-Quaker buddy why you're wearing your coat backward. It's not fashion, it's penance. By now, you're knee-deep in their world, feeling the scratchy wool of your plain Quaker cloak. Their peculiar punishments are starting to make sense. They're not about cruelty, but control, wrapped in a strange kind of love. You're still in the 1640s, trudging through the muck of an English village, the air sharp with the tang of damp hay and distant forge smoke. The Quakers are just a spark in this chaotic world, but it's a spark about to catch fire. England's a pressure cooker, civil war rages, King Charles I is losing his grip, and religious factions are brawling over who gets to define God's will. You're weaving through a crowded market, overhearing Puritans muttering about predestination while royalists grumble about taxes. Into this mess stepped the Quakers, with their plain clothes and radical ideas, looking like they wandered out of a different century. You're about to see how this turbulent backdrop shaped their peculiar approach to discipline. Mainstream fact: the English Civil War, starting in 1642, fractured society, with Parliament's forces clashing against the king's. Religion was the fuse. Everyone had an opinion on how to worship, and no one agreed. You're dodging pamphlets in the street, each one shouting about the true church. The Quakers, emerging around 1647, didn't fit any mold. They rejected priests, fancy cathedrals, and even the idea that you needed a middleman to talk to God. Picture yourself at a Quaker gathering. No altar, no sermon, just people sitting in silence, waiting for divine inspiration. It's weirdly calming, but to outsiders, it's borderline heretical. This chaos gave Quakers both freedom and danger: freedom to form their beliefs, but danger from a society that hated weirdos. Now, let's zoom in on the quirky side. The Quakers weren't just dodging royalist soldiers or Puritan spies. They were also navigating local busybodies. One odd tidbit: some villages had scolds' bridles, metal masks for gossipy women, but Quakers refused such brutal tools. Instead, if you, say, spread a rumor about a neighbor's cow, they might ask you to publicly apologize in a meeting house, standing alone while everyone prayed for your soul. You're there, your stomach twisting as silence stretches on. It's not a bridle, but it stings in its own way. Joke number 1. Forget waterboarding. Quaker guilt trips could break anyone. Historians still argue whether this religious turmoil made Quakers stricter or more lenient. Were their punishments a way to stand out as pure in a world of chaos? Or were they just trying to keep their fledgling group from falling apart? You're pondering this as you pass a tavern where men shout about the war. The Quakers' answer was to double down on community. If you broke their rules, like wearing a feathered hat, a big no-no for their simplicity obsession, you might face a visit from elders. Picture 2 stern Quakers at your door, not yelling, but calmly explaining why your hat is a spiritual crime. You're sweating, wondering if you can hide that hat under the bed. Let's paint the scene. You're in a Quaker meeting, the room lit by a single flickering candle. Someone's being disciplined for worldly behavior, maybe dancing at a fair. The punishment? They're to sit through extra meetings, soaking in silence until they reflect. It's not exactly fun, but compared to the era's usual penalties, public whippings or ear cropping, it's almost gentle. Another quirky detail: Quakers sometimes used testimonies as punishment, making you read a statement of your wrongs aloud. You're imagining yourself stuttering through one, your voice echoing in the quiet room. Joke number 2. Reading your apology to a room of Quakers is like bombing at an open mic night, but with more God. The war's shadow looms large. You hear distant cannon fire, a reminder of the stakes. Quakers aren't just fighting for their beliefs, they're fighting to exist. Their punishments, peculiar as they seem, are a survival tactic, keeping their group tight-knit when the world wants to tear them apart. You're starting to get it. In a society where everyone's picking sides, the Quakers are carving out their own space, one silent stare at a time. As you leave the meeting, you glance at a Quaker woman, her face calm but unyielding. She's part of this new order, and you're about to learn more about the man who started it all. You're still in the 1640s, the English air heavy with the scent of wet wool and rebellion. The Civil War's din hums in the distance, but you're zeroing in on one man, George Fox, the guy who lit the Quaker fuse. Picture yourself trailing him through a muddy field, his boots caked, his face set like he's seen the future. He's not your typical preacher, no silk robes or booming sermons. He's a lanky, leatherworker son with a knack for stirring souls. You're about to walk in his shadow, seeing how his radical vision birthed the Quakers and their peculiar punishments. Mainstream fact: George Fox, born in 1624, founded the Religious Society of Friends around 1647. He was a wanderer, preaching that everyone had an inner light, a direct connection to God. You're standing in a Leicestershire crowd, watching him speak, his voice steady but fierce. He's not reading from a Bible or quoting scholars. He's just talking, like he's chatting with a friend. This is revolutionary. In a world where priests gatekeep salvation, Fox is handing out the keys. But his ideas come with a cost. You notice constables eyeing him, ready to arrest him for blasphemy. His defiance sets the stage for the Quaker way of life, including how they handle rule breakers. Let's get quirky. Fox wasn't just about big ideas. He had quirks that shaped Quaker discipline. One odd tidbit. He once refused to take off his hat for a judge, a huge insult back then. You're imagining yourself in his shoes, staring down a red-faced magistrate, your hat firmly on. Quakers took this defiance and turned it inward. If you showed pride, like flaunting a fancy buckle, they might make you remove it publicly. A mini Fox moment of humility. You're at a Quaker meeting now, watching a young man sheepishly unpin a shiny clasp while everyone nods. It's not a flogging, but it's mortifying. Joke number 1. Forget detention. Quakers invented stand there and feel awkward as punishment. Historians still argue whether Fox's vision was democratic or dogmatic. Did his inner light idea empower Quakers to self-govern? Or did it create a new kind of control where everyone policed everyone else? You're pondering this as you follow Fox to a hilltop where he's preaching to a ragtag crowd. Farmers, weavers, even a skeptical soldier. His words are simple. Trust your conscience, not kings or clergy. But that trust came with rules. If you strayed, say, by swearing an oath, which Quakers banned, you'd face their peculiar justice. Picture yourself slipping up, maybe muttering, "I swear," in a market. The elders don't yell. They just summon you to a silent meeting, where the quiet feels louder than any lecture. You're starting to feel the rhythm of Fox's world. He's not just preaching. He's building a community that's half family, half boot camp. Their punishments reflect this. If you, say, got drunk at a tavern, they wouldn't whip you like Puritans might. Instead, you're advised to confess in a meeting, your voice trembling as you admit your sin. Another quirky detail. Fox kept journals, obsessively noting who followed or failed his teachings. You're flipping through one now, seeing his spiky handwriting list someone reproved for jesting. Yep, even joking too much could land you in trouble. Joke number 2. Imagine Fox as your boss, side-eyeing you for laughing at a meme. As you trail Fox through another village, you see his influence everywhere. A woman in plain gray refuses to curtsy to a noble. A man stands silent when asked to swear loyalty. These acts of defiance inspire the Quakers' internal rules. Their punishments, shaming, fines, or silent reflection, are Fox's legacy, designed to keep the group pure without bloodshed. You're starting to admire his stubbornness, even if it's intense. As you leave the crowd, the wind carries Fox's voice, urging simplicity. You're ready to see how his followers took these ideas and ran with them, defying a world that wanted them crushed. You're knee-deep in the 1650s now, the English countryside buzzing with tension as Quakers spread like wildfire. The Civil War's still a fresh scar, and society's rules are as rigid as the oak beams in a village church. You're slipping through a crowd, catching glimpses of Quakers, plain clothes, calm faces, but eyes that burn with defiance. These folks aren't just sitting quietly. They're shaking up the status quo, refusing to play by England's strict social script. You're about to see how their bold protests against the world's norms shaped the peculiar punishments they used to keep their own in line. Mainstream fact. By the early 1650s, Quakers were notorious for disrupting the established order. They'd barge into churches, heckling priests mid-sermon, or refuse to pay tithes to the state church. You're there, watching a Quaker named Mary Dyer stand in a Puritan chapel, calmly calling the minister a hireling, while congregants gasp. This isn't just rebellion. It's a middle finger to hierarchy. But this defiance got them arrested, fined, even whipped. You hear constables muttering about those trembling fanatics, a nod to the Quakers' nickname, earned from their intense, shaking worship. Their public stunts made them targets, but also tightened their internal discipline. Now, the quirky bit. Quakers didn't just defy outsiders. They had their own code, and breaking it meant facing odd consequences. One peculiar practice. If you interrupted a silent meeting with chatter, maybe you whispered about a neighbor's new cow, you might be reproved by having to stand and explain yourself. You're in that meeting house now, your palms sweaty as you rise, every eye on you. It's not a dungeon, but it feels like one. Joke number 1. Imagine getting canceled by Quakers for talking during their holy quiet time. Ouch. This wasn't about pain. It was about making you feel the weight of your mistake, Quaker style. Historians still argue whether these bold protests made Quakers harsher on their own. Did their defiance of England's laws inspire a need to prove they weren't lawless, leading to stricter internal punishments? You're mulling this as you pass a marketplace, where a Quaker woman refuses to curtsy to a passing noble. She's not loud, just still, like a stone in a river. But back in their community, that same stubbornness applies. If you, say, wore a ribbon in your hair, too worldly for their taste, you might be asked to remove it publicly, maybe even burn it. You're picturing yourself fumbling to untie that ribbon, cheeks hot, while elders nod approvingly. Let's set the scene. You're at a Quaker gathering, the room dim, the air thick with the scent of beeswax candles. Someone's in trouble for vainglory, maybe bragging about a good harvest. The punishment? They're to sit silently for an extra meeting, reflecting, while others worship. It's not brutal, but it's intense, like being sent to the world's most judgmental timeout. Another quirky tidbit: some Quaker groups kept books of sufferings, recording not just their persecutions, but also who got disciplined and why. You're sneaking a peek at one, seeing entries like Elizabeth for singing to confess. Singing? Yep, too frivolous. Joke number 2. Quakers were the original no fun allowed squad. Their defiance wasn't just about big gestures. You notice small acts. Quakers using thee and thou to everyone, noble or not, flattening the social ladder. But this came with a price. If you slipped, maybe bowing to a lord out of habit, you'd face the community's quiet wrath. Picture yourself explaining why you bent the knee, your voice echoing in a silent room. Their punishments were about keeping the group unified, a shield against a world that wanted them gone. As you leave the meeting house, you feel the Quakers' resolve, like a low hum, steady and unyielding. They're ready to carve out their space, and you're about to see how they turn defiance into discipline. You're still in the 1650s, the Quaker movement gaining steam in England's tense, war-scarred villages. The scent of damp earth and wood smoke clings to your plain cloak as you slip into a Quaker meeting house, its bare walls lit by a single lantern. These folks aren't just rebels against the crown or church. They're obsessed with keeping their own community pure. You're about to uncover why they crafted their peculiar punishments, those strange, shame-based penalties that feel like a cross between a group hug and a public scolding. It's not about breaking bones. It's about breaking pride, and you're right in the middle of it. Mainstream fact: Quakers, or the Religious Society of Friends, developed their discipline system in the 1650s to maintain unity and moral rigor. With no priests or formal hierarchy, they relied on collective accountability. You're watching a meeting where everyone's equal: farmers, weavers, even women, deciding together how to handle a rule breaker. This was radical for the time, when most groups leaned on top-down authority. But unity meant rules. If you strayed from their values, like showing off with a fancy coat, you faced consequences designed to bring you back to the inner light. It's less about punishment and more about correction, but it still stings. Now, the quirky side. One odd method was the public reproof, where you'd stand in a meeting and admit your fault, like a 17th-century version of a bad Yelp review you wrote yourself. Picture yourself. Maybe you got caught wearing a bright scarf, scandalous for Quakers' plain style. You're standing, voice shaky, saying, "I erred in vanity." The room's silent, but you feel every stare. Joke number 1. It's like confessing to eating the last slice of pizza, but with eternal salvation on the line. This wasn't random. Quakers believed shame could spark reflection, unlike the era's usual floggings or stocks, which just left scars. Historians still argue whether these punishments were truly voluntary or subtly coercive. Did Quakers freely confess because they believed in the process, or did peer pressure make it feel mandatory? You're mulling this as you sit in the meeting house, the wooden bench hard under you. The system worked because Quakers lived in tight-knit groups, where gossip spread faster than a cold. If you, say, skipped a meeting to haggle at the market, you'd get a visit from elders. Not with pitchforks, but with calm, piercing questions about your priorities. You're imagining that chat now, squirming as they ask, "Why dost thou neglect the light?" It's not torture, but it's not tea and biscuits either. Let's dive deeper. You're watching a young man, maybe 25, reproved for idleness. He lingered too long at a tavern. His punishment? He's to attend extra meetings, sitting silently while others worship. It's dull, But that's the point. Boredom as a path to redemption. Another quirky tidbit. Some Quaker groups assigned overseers, not like prison guards, but like nosy ants who check your behavior. You're picturing one now, a stern woman noting if you wore mismatched buttons, a sign of carelessness. Joke number 2. Quaker overseers were the original HOA, but with more Bible and less lawn obsession. The why behind these punishments is key. You're starting to see it. Quakers were surrounded by enemies, Puritans, Royalists, even neighbors who thought they were nuts. Their peculiar penalties were a way to prove they weren't chaotic rebels, but a disciplined, godly community. Picture yourself as a Quaker, feeling the world's eyes on you. If you mess up, it's not just about you, it's about the group's survival. That's why they leaned on shame over violence. As you leave the meeting house, the lantern's glow fades, but the weight of their rules lingers. You're ready to see how these ideas played out in the real world, where shame took center stage. You're in the heart of a 1650s English village, the air thick with the scent of straw and simmering stew. The Quakers' meeting house looms ahead, its plain wooden walls hiding a world of quiet intensity. You're about to step into one of their most peculiar punishments, shaming in the stocks. Not the brutal, vegetable-throwing stocks of the town square. Mind you, Quaker stocks were a subtler beast, designed to humble, not harm. You're weaving through a crowd of gray-clad Quakers, their faces calm but unyielding, as they prepare to discipline one of their own. It's a strange mix of mercy and mortification, and you're right there, feeling the weight of their stares. Mainstream fact: public shaming was a common 17th century punishment, but Quakers adapted it to fit their nonviolent ethos. While towns might lock petty thieves in stocks for public ridicule, Quakers used a milder version, sometimes literal stocks, but often just public exposure in their meeting house. You're watching a young woman, maybe 20, who's been caught speaking vainly, perhaps boasting about her weaving skills. She's not chained, but she's standing at the front of the room, head bowed, as the community sits in silence. It's not a spectacle like a Puritan pillory, but the quiet judgment cuts deep. You're there, your own pulse quickening, wondering how she's holding up. Now, the quirky bit. Quaker shaming wasn't always about standing still. Sometimes it involved symbolic acts. One odd practice. If you, say, wore a flashy belt buckle, you might have to remove it publicly and hand it over, like surrendering a forbidden toy. Picture yourself fumbling with that buckle, your fingers clumsy under the group's gaze. The buckle's tossed into a box, never to be seen again. Joke number 1. It's like donating your favorite hoodie to charity, but with 30 Quakers judging your fashion sense. This wasn't just about embarrassment, it was about stripping away pride, one accessory at a time. Historians still argue whether Quaker shaming was empowering or oppressive. Did it give the community a way to self-regulate without violence? Or did it create a culture of fear where everyone watched their step? You're pondering this as you stand in the meeting house, the air heavy with expectation. The woman's punishment isn't over. She's to read a short testimony, admitting her fault. You hear her voice, soft but steady, as she confesses to seeking worldly praise. It's not dramatic, but it's raw. You're imagining yourself in her place, your throat tight, wondering if you'd crack under the pressure. The silence that follows feels like a blanket, heavy but oddly comforting. Let's set the scene. You're sitting on a hard bench, the room lit by flickering candles. The stocks, when used, aren't always physical. Sometimes it's just a designated spot where offenders stand, like a spiritual naughty corner. Another quirky tidbit: Quakers occasionally paired shaming with labor, like asking the offender to sweep the meeting house for a week. You're picturing that young woman, broom in hand, sweeping while elders nod. It's not backbreaking, but it's humbling, like being grounded by a roomful of disappointed parents. Joke number 2. Quaker stocks were the original go-to-your-room, but also clean-it vibe. You're starting to get why shaming worked for Quakers. In a world where neighbors might betray them to authorities, they needed trust. Public shaming wasn't just punishment. It was a ritual to rebuild that trust. If you messed up, you showed everyone you were still one of us by taking your lumps. You're watching the woman return to her seat, her face flushed but composed. The meeting moves on, but you feel the lesson linger. Pride is the enemy, and shame is the cure. As you step outside, the cool night air hits you, and you realize the Quaker's world is about more than shame. It's about sacrifice, and you're about to see another piece of their peculiar justice. You're back in the 1650s, standing in a Quaker meeting house, the faint scent of tallow candles and polished wood filling the air. The benches are packed with Quakers, their plain clothes a stark contrast to the colorful chaos of the outside world. You're about to dive into another layer of their peculiar punishments, fines for faith. These aren't your typical pay-up or go-to-jail fines levied by grumpy magistrates. No, these are internal, community-driven penalties, designed to nudge wayward Quakers back to their spiritual path. You're watching the group deliberate, their faces serious but not cruel, and you're about to feel the sting of their quiet justice. Mainstream fact: Quakers in the 1650s used fines as a disciplinary tool to enforce their strict moral code. Unlike the state's punitive taxes or church tithes, these fines were often symbolic, meant to teach rather than bankrupt. You're in a meeting where a man, maybe a farmer named Thomas, is being reproved for worldly excess. He bought a horse-tooth fine for Quaker simplicity. He's not in chains, but he's standing, agreeing to pay a small sum to the community's poor fund. It's not about the money, it's about humility. You're there, sensing the tension as he nods, his jaw tight but compliant. Now, the quirky bit. These fines weren't always cash. Sometimes you'd pay by giving up something dear, like that fancy horse. Picture yourself as Thomas, leading your prized mare to a neighbor's barn, knowing she'll serve a humbler purpose now. The community watches, not jeering, but nodding in approval. Joke number 1. It's like Venmo your ego to charity, Quaker style. Some groups even had a fines box, a literal chest where you drop coins or goods. You're imagining sneaking a peek inside, seeing a mix of pennies, buttons, and one lonely silver spoon, offerings from past offenders. Historians still argue whether these fines were fair or manipulative. Did they strengthen community bonds by redistributing wealth, or did they pressure Quakers into conformity? You're mulling this as you sit among the group, the silence broken only by the creak of a bench. Thomas's fine isn't huge, maybe a few shillings, but it's a public act. If you slipped up, say by hosting a lavish dinner, you'd face a similar fate. You're picturing yourself, reluctantly tossing a coin into that fines box, your stomach twisting as elders murmur thanks. It's not robbery, it's redemption, but it still feels like a pinch. Let's paint the scene. You're in the meeting house, the air cool despite the packed room. The elders don't shout. They explain, calmly, why Thomas's horse was a spiritual misstep. Another quirky tidbit: fines were sometimes paired with a task, like helping a poorer Quaker family with their harvest. You're envisioning Thomas, sweat on his brow, stacking hay for a widow while the community nods. It's not just about losing money. It's about giving time, effort, pride. Joke number 2. Quaker fines were like community service, but with more guilt and fewer orange vests. You're starting to see the logic. Quakers lived in a world where outsiders, Puritans, royalists, even nosy neighbors, watched their every move. Their fines weren't just about discipline. They were about optics, showing the world they could govern themselves. If you broke the rules, the fine proved you were still loyal to the group's values. You're watching Thomas sit down, his face a mix of relief and resolve. The meeting moves on, but the fines box sits in the corner, a quiet reminder. As you step outside, the village hums with life, carts rattling, dogs barking, but you feel the Quaker world tightening its grip. Their peculiar justice is about more than shame or money. It's about belonging, and you're about to see how far they'd go to protect it. You're still in the 1650s, the Quaker meeting house a cocoon of flickering candlelight and hushed resolve. Outside, the English village churns with the clatter of carts and the squawk of geese. But in here, it's all solemn faces and plain gray cloaks. You're about to face one of the Quakers' most peculiar punishments: banishment. Not the pack your bags and sail to France kind, but a quieter, more devastating exile from their tight-knit community. You're standing among the Quakers, feeling the air grow heavy as they prepare to cast someone out. It's not physical pain, but the emotional sting is sharp, and you're about to feel it up close. Mainstream fact: Quakers in the 1650s used banishment as a last resort for members who repeatedly defied their values. Unlike state banishments, which often meant exile to colonies or worse, Quaker banishment was social, cutting you off from meetings, friendships, even family ties within the group. You're watching a man named Samuel, maybe 30, who's been warned before for persistent worldliness, like trading in luxury goods. He stands before the group, his face pale, as elders explain he's no longer welcome. You're there, your chest tight, sensing the finality. It's not a dungeon, but losing your community in this era is like losing your lifeline. Now, the quirky bit. Banishment wasn't just a don't come back decree, it came with rituals. Sometimes, the banished were asked to leave behind a token, like a hat or cloak, as a symbol of their departure. Picture yourself as Samuel, reluctantly placing your worn cap on the meeting house table, knowing it's the last time you'll sit here. The room's silent, but the gesture screams finality. Joke number 1. It's like unfriending someone on social media, but with more existential dread. Some groups even read a formal disownment statement logged in their records. You're imagining that document. It's ink stark. Samuel, for pride, is no more of us. Historians still argue whether banishment was humane or harsh. Did it offer a chance for redemption, since you could theoretically return after reforming? Or was it a cruel severance, leaving you adrift in a hostile world? You're mulling this as you watch Samuel's shoulders slump. If you were in his shoes, maybe banished for, say, repeatedly swearing oaths, a Quaker no-no, you'd feel the world shrink. You're picturing yourself outside the meeting house, the door shut, the silence louder than any yell. The community you leaned on, gone. In the 1650s, where neighbors could turn you in for heresy, that's a lonely road. Let's set the scene. You're on a hard bench, the air thick with the scent of wool and wax. Samuel's banishment isn't dramatic. No shouting, no chains. The elders speak softly, saying his actions grieve the light. Another quirky tidbit. Some Quaker groups sent a visitation to the banished, checking if they'd repent months later. You're envisioning two elders knocking on Samuel's door, their faces kind but firm, asking if he's ready to ditch his silk trade. It's not a warm reunion, it's a test. Joke number 2. Quaker banishment was like being ghosted, but with a side of spiritual homework. You're starting to grasp the weight of this punishment. Quakers weren't just a church, they were a family, a fortress against a world that jailed or mocked them. Banishment wasn't about cruelty. It was about survival, protecting the group's purity. You're watching Samuel walk out, his steps slow, the village swallowing him up. The meeting resumes, but you feel the void he left. Their peculiar justice is relentless, not because they're mean, but because they're desperate to hold their fragile world together. As you step into the chilly night, the stars above feel distant, and you're ready to see how the Quakers' women shaped this unyielding system. You're back in the 1650s, the Quaker meeting house a quiet refuge from the noisy English village outside, where blacksmiths hammer and children chase stray hens. The air inside smells of polished wood and faint lavender from someone's plain smock. You're about to uncover a surprising piece of the Quakers' peculiar punishment puzzle, the role of women. In a world where women are expected to be silent shadows, Quaker women aren't just sitting pretty. They're shaping the community's discipline, wielding influence in ways that raise eyebrows. You're among them now, watching their calm but steely resolve, ready to see how they helped craft those odd penalties. Mainstream fact: Quaker women in the 1650s had unprecedented authority within their communities, thanks to the belief in the inner light that made everyone, man or woman, equal before God. You're in a meeting, noticing women like Margaret Fell, a key figure, speaking as boldly as men about a member's misstep. Maybe someone's been vain, flaunting an embroidered shawl. The women don't just nod along. They propose punishments, like public confession or a fine to the poor fund. You're struck by their confidence in an era when most women can't even own property. Their voices carry weight, shaping the group's peculiar justice. Now, the quirky bit. Women often led the charge in visitation, where elders checked on rule breakers. Picture yourself as the offender, maybe caught singing a bawdy tavern song. Shocking for Quakers. Two women knock on your door, their faces kind but unyielding, asking why you strayed. You're stammering, caught off guard by their authority. They might suggest you apologize in a meeting, standing while the group prays. Joke number 1. It's like getting a lecture from your coolest aunt, but with eternal salvation on the line. Some women even kept discipline records, noting who repented or didn't. You're imagining their neat handwriting. Jane, for mirth, to reflect. Historians still argue whether this female influence made Quaker punishments gentler or stricter. Did women's involvement soften the system with empathy, or did they enforce rules fiercely to prove their spiritual equality? You're pondering this as you watch a woman elder, maybe 40, calmly explain why that shawl wearer needs to make amends. If you were in trouble, say, for gossiping about a neighbor's cow, you'd face her gaze, feeling like a kid caught sneaking sweets. You're picturing yourself in that meeting, confessing to your chatter, the women's nods both comforting and unnerving. Their authority feels like a quiet revolution. Let's paint the scene. You're on a creaky bench, the meeting house dim, the air warm with packed bodies. A woman rises to speak about discipline, her voice steady. Another quirky tidbit. Women sometimes led women's meetings, separate gatherings where they handled female offenders, like those who married non-Quakers, a big taboo. You're envisioning one now, women discussing a young bride who eloped with a Puritan. Her punishment? A public apology and extra silent meetings. It's not harsh, but it's humbling. Joke number 2. Quaker women's meetings were like book clubs, but instead of wine, you got guilt. You're starting to see how women were the backbone of Quaker discipline. In a world that mocked their faith, they ensured the group stayed united, using shame and reflection over violence. Their punishments, confessions, fines, silent stares, were peculiar because they had to be. Quakers were outsiders, and women helped hold the line. You're watching that elder sit down, her words still echoing. The meeting moves on, but you feel her influence, like a steady hand on the group's soul. As you step outside, the village's chaos feels distant, and you're ready to cross the ocean to see how these ideas fared in the New World. You've left the muddy villages of 1650s England behind, crossing the Atlantic to the rugged shores of colonial America. It's the early 1660s, and you're in a Quaker settlement, maybe Pennsylvania or Rhode Island, where the air smells of pine and fresh-turned earth. The meeting house here is rougher, its logs still smelling of sap, but the Quaker's spirit is the same, plain, defiant, and fiercely communal. You're about to see how their peculiar punishments, those shame-based nudges from across the ocean, play out in this new world. The stakes are higher here, with hostile neighbors and wilderness at every turn, and you're right in the thick of it. Mainstream fact: Quakers began settling in America in the 1650s, seeking freedom from England's persecution, but they faced new challenges in colonies like Massachusetts, where Puritans ruled. You're in a Quaker town, watching settlers build a community under scrutiny. Their discipline system, fines, shaming, banishment, came with them, but it's tougher here. If someone strays, say by trading with non-Quakers for flashy goods, the group can't afford division. You're at a meeting where a man, maybe a carpenter named Isaac, is reproved for buying a silver-trimmed hat. He's standing, head bowed, agreeing to donate the hat's value to the poor. It's familiar, but the wilderness outside makes it feel urgent. Now, the quirky bit. In these small settlements, punishments often doubled as community theater. If you, say, skipped meetings to hunt, you might have to stand in the meeting house doorway, visible to passers-by, as a living lesson. Picture yourself there, your cheeks burning as a neighbor smirks. The Quakers didn't use stocks as often here. Wood was for building, not shaming, but public exposure was key. Joke number 1. It's like being the world's worst greeter at a Quaker Walmart. Some groups even had fence-sitting penalties, where you'd literally sit on a fence during a meeting to mark your shame. You're imagining the splinters. Ouch. Historians still argue whether colonial Quaker punishments were stricter due to isolation. Did the harsh frontier make them cling tighter to discipline, or did the promise of freedom soften their approach? You're mulling this as you sit in the meeting house, the wind whistling through cracks in the walls. Isaac's punishment isn't just about his hat. It's about signaling to nosy Puritan neighbors that Quakers aren't lawless. If you messed up, maybe by bartering for a gaudy blanket, you'd face a similar public moment. You're picturing yourself handing over that blanket, the group's silence louder than any lecture. Let's set the scene. You're on a splintery bench, the room lit by a single lantern. The elders, men and women alike, speak calmly about Isaac's worldliness. Another quirky tidbit: colonial Quakers sometimes used labor penalties, like asking offenders to repair community buildings. You're envisioning Isaac, hammer in hand, fixing a leaky roof while elders watch. It's not just punishment, it's a chance to prove he's still one of us. Joke number 2. Quaker discipline was like DIY therapy, but with more repentance and fewer power tools. The meeting house feels like a fortress, holding the group together against external threats. You're starting to feel the pressure of this new world. Quakers here aren't just dodging English jails. They're dodging Puritan laws, native tensions, and the wilderness itself. Their peculiar punishments are a lifeline, keeping the group cohesive when a single crack could spell doom. You're watching Isaac return to his seat, his face a mix of relief and resolve. The meeting moves on, but you hear wolves howling outside, a reminder of the stakes. Their justice, shame, fines, public acts isn't just about faith, it's about survival. As you step into the chilly night, the stars overhead feel vast, and you're ready to unravel another strange Quaker rule that shaped their discipline. You're still in the 1660s, nestled in a Quaker settlement in colonial America, the scent of cedar and damp soil lingering in the air. The meeting house is a sturdy haven, its rough-hewn benches packed with Quakers in their trademark gray. You're about to unravel one of their strangest quirks, their absolute ban on swearing oaths, a rule that sparked some of the most peculiar punishments in their playbook. In a world where oaths are as common as handshakes, this defiance sets Quakers apart and gets them in trouble, both with outsiders and within their own ranks. You're in the thick of it, feeling the tension as the community enforces its odd justice. Mainstream fact: Quakers refuse to swear oaths, believing their words should always be truthful, as per biblical teachings like Matthew 5 verse 34. You're in a colonial courtroom, watching a Quaker named Hannah stand firm, refusing to swear loyalty to the crown. It's not just stubbornness, it's a core belief that lying under oath dishonors God. This got Quakers fined or jailed by authorities, but within their community, slipping up and swearing an oath was a serious offense. If you, say, swore to a magistrate out of fear, you'd face the group's quiet wrath. You're imagining Hannah now, back in the meeting house, explaining her lapse to stern elders. Now, the quirky bit. The punishment for oath swearing was often a public acknowledgement, where you'd stand and admit your fault in a meeting. Picture yourself, maybe you muttered, "I swear," in a heated market deal. You're standing, voice wobbly, confessing to bearing false witness. The silence is deafening, like a room full of disappointed grandparents. Joke number 1. It's like apologizing for a bad tweet, but with more soul-searching and fewer emojis. Some groups even asked you to write a formal apology, read aloud and logged in their records. You're picturing that paper, your shaky signature under words like, "I regret my oath." Historians still argue whether the oath ban made Quakers more unified or overly rigid. Did it strengthen their identity as truth-tellers? Or did it create a culture where minor slips led to outsized shame? You're mulling this as you sit in the meeting house, the air heavy with expectation. Hannah's punishment isn't harsh. She's to attend extra meetings, reflecting in silence, but it's humbling. If you were in her shoes, you'd feel the weight of every stare. You're imagining yourself, head bowed, promising never to swear again, even if a Puritan sheriff demands it. The community's trust is fragile, and you've dented it. Let's set the scene. You're on a creaky bench, the lantern casting long shadows. The elders, men and women, discuss Hannah's case with calm precision. Another quirky tidbit: some Quakers paired oath punishments with restitution, like donating to a community cause. You're envisioning Hannah handing over a few coins to help a struggling family, her face flushed but resolute. It's not about the money. It's about proving she's still Quaker at heart. Joke number 2. Quaker oath penalties were like paying a fine for lying on your resume, but with more God and less LinkedIn. You're starting to see why the oath ban mattered. In a colony where Puritans and Royalists watch Quakers like hawks, their refusal to swear oaths is a bold statement. But it's also a risk. If one Quaker swears, it weakens the group's reputation. Their peculiar punishments, like public confessions or extra silence, are about rebuilding that trust. You're watching Hannah sit down, the meeting moving on, but the lesson lingers. Truth is non-negotiable. As you step outside, the night air bites, and the distant howl of a wolf reminds you of the world's dangers. You're ready to explore another strange tool in the Quakers' disciplinary kit. You're still in the 1660s, tucked inside a Quaker meeting house in a colonial American settlement, the air thick with the scent of pine and candle wax. The world outside hums with the creak of wagons and the chatter of settlers, but in here, it's a different kind of quiet, a silence so deep it feels alive. You're about to dive into one of the Quakers' most peculiar disciplinary tools, silence itself. Not just any silence, but the deliberate, heavy quiet of their meetings, used to enforce behavior and bring wayward members back to the fold. You're sitting among them, feeling the weight of that stillness, ready to see how it shapes their strange justice. Mainstream fact: Quaker worship in the 1660s centered on silent meetings, where members sat together, waiting for divine inspiration to speak. This silence wasn't just spiritual, it was a disciplinary weapon. If you broke community rules, say by gossiping about a neighbor's harvest, you might be sentenced to extra meetings, forced to sit through hours of quiet reflection. You're watching a young woman, maybe Sarah, who's been reproved for idle talk. She's here, hands folded, enduring the silence as her punishment. You're on the bench beside her, your own thoughts loud in the stillness, wondering how she's coping. Now, the quirky bit. Silence wasn't just a timeout, it was a performance. Offenders like Sarah might be asked to sit in a specific spot, maybe near the elders, where everyone could see their reflection. Picture yourself in her place, caught for, say, laughing too loudly at a market. You're parked in that visible seat, every rustle of your cloak amplified. The group size aren't harsh, but they're steady, like a room full of patient teachers. Joke number 1. It's like being stuck in the worst Zoom meeting, but with no mute button and more guilt. Some groups even required a verbal confession after the silence, a cherry on top of the shame sundae. Historians still argue whether this silent discipline was liberating or oppressive. Did it give Quakers a space to self-correct through introspection, or was it a subtle way to enforce conformity? You're pondering this as you feel the meeting house's quiet wrap around you like a heavy blanket. Sarah's punishment isn't physical. She's not in stocks or paying a fine, but it's intense. If you were disciplined, maybe for skipping a meeting to fish, you'd be here too, counting knots in the wood to stay sane. You're imagining yourself, trying not to fidget, as the silence stretches like a taut string. Let's set the scene. You're on a hard bench. The lanterns glow soft on the log walls. The elders sit calmly, their silence a signal for others to follow. Another quirky tidbit. Some Quaker groups used graded silence, where repeat offenders faced longer sessions, like stacking detention hours. You're envisioning Sarah, back for her third meeting this week, her face a mix of boredom and resolve. It's not cruel, but it's relentless, designed to make you confront your flaws. Joke number 2. Quaker silence was like meditation, but instead of finding Zen, you found your conscience staring you down. You're starting to get why silence worked. Quakers weren't just a community. They were a fortress, surrounded by suspicious Puritans and unpredictable wilderness. Their peculiar punishments, like these silent marathons, kept the group tight-knit without spilling blood. You're watching Sarah, her posture softening as the meeting ends. She's not broken, but she's humbled, and the group's trust in her is slowly mending. The silence lingers as you step outside, the night air sharp with the scent of frost. You're ready to weigh the bigger question. Were these punishments as gentle as Quakers claimed, or was there a hidden edge to their justice? You're still in the 1660s, standing in a Quaker meeting house in a colonial American settlement, the faint glow of lanterns casting shadows on the rough log walls. The air carries the scent of damp wool and cedar, and the silence of the last meeting still hums in your ears. You're about to wrestle with a big question. Were the Quakers' peculiar punishments, shaming, fines, silence, banishment, truly as lenient as they claimed, or did they carry a sharper edge? You're among the Quakers, their plain faces masking complex motives, ready to weigh the debate over their strange justice. It's a murky puzzle, and you're diving in. Mainstream fact: Quakers in the 1660s prided themselves on nonviolent discipline, a stark contrast to the era's brutal punishments like flogging or branding. You're in a meeting, watching a man named Daniel reproved for worldly pride after buying a gilded Bible. His penalty? A public confession and a week of extra silent meetings. Compared to a Puritan's whip or a magistrate's stocks, it's mild. No blood, no scars. But you're noticing Daniel's tight jaw, the way his hands clench. The punishment may not bruise the body, but it's working on his spirit. You're starting to wonder if lenient is the right word. Now, the quirky bit. Some Quaker punishments had an odd twist. They'd let you choose your penalty within limits. Picture yourself as Daniel, caught with that fancy Bible. The elders offer you options: confess publicly or donate the book's value to the poor. You pick confession, but standing before the group, your voice cracking, feels like a trap. Joke number 1. It's like choosing between a root canal or a cavity filling. Neither's fun. This choice was recorded in meeting logs, making it official. You're imagining those records. Neat ink noting Daniel chose to speak his fault. It's freedom, but with strings. Historians still argue whether Quaker punishments were humane or subtly coercive. Did their nonviolent approach reflect mercy, or did the psychological weight of shame and silence create a different kind of control? You're mulling this as you sit in the meeting house, the air thick with unspoken expectations. Daniel's confession is over, but the group's eyes linger, ensuring he feels the lesson. If you were in his place, maybe reproved for wearing a bright scarf, you'd feel that pressure too. You're picturing yourself, stumbling through an apology, the silence afterward louder than any whip's crack. Was this kinder, or just a slower burn? Let's set the scene. You're on a creaky bench, the room's warmth clashing with the chill seeping through the walls. The elders, men and women, nod as Daniel sits, his face flushed but composed. Another quirky tidbit. Some Quakers used restorative punishments, like asking offenders to help a wronged neighbor, say, mending a fence you gossiped about. You're envisioning Daniel, hammer in hand, fixing a widow's gate under watchful eyes. It's not harsh, but it's humbling, tying shame to service. Joke number 2. Quaker justice was like community service, but with more soul-searching and fewer traffic cones. You're starting to see both sides. Quakers avoided violence, a radical choice when Puritans were slicing ears for lesser crimes. But their punishments leaned hard on social pressure, using the community's bond as both glue and whip. In a settlement surrounded by hostile neighbors and untamed wilderness, that control kept them alive. You're watching Daniel blend back into the group, the meeting moving on, but you feel the tension. Leniency came at a cost. As you step outside, the night air sharp with frost, you're ready to trace how these peculiar punishments began to soften as the Quaker world slowly changed. You're in the late 1660s now, still in a Quaker settlement in colonial America. The meeting house's log walls weathered but sturdy. The air smells of beeswax and the faint tang of autumn leaves drifting through an open window. The Quakers' peculiar punishments, shaming, fines, silence, banishment, have defined their tight-knit world, but change is creeping in. You're about to trace how their discipline softened, as new ideas, growing communities, and a shifting world nudged them toward less rigid ways. You're among them, sensing a subtle shift in their once unyielding justice, ready to see how their strange penalties began to fade. Mainstream fact: by the late 1660s and into the 1670s, Quaker communities, especially in colonies like Pennsylvania, grew larger and more stable, reducing the need for strict internal discipline. You're in a meeting, noticing more faces, new settlers, even some non-Quakers trading nearby. The group's discussing a young man, maybe Peter, who's been vain, wearing a hat with a feather. In the past, he'd faced public shaming or a fine, but now the elders suggest a private talk and a promise to reform. You're struck by the gentleness. It's still discipline, but the edge is duller, reflecting a community less desperate to prove itself. Now, the quirky bit. This softening brought odd new practices like guided reflection instead of public confessions. Picture yourself as Peter, caught with that feathered hat. Instead of standing before the group, you're pulled aside by an elder who asks you to write a letter about your inner light and why the hat was a mistake. You're scribbling, feeling half ridiculous, half relieved. Joke number 1. It's like writing a book report on your own bad decisions, but with more God. These letters were sometimes read privately by elders, not the whole meeting, a quieter kind of accountability. You're imagining that letter, your clumsy words about vanity tucked away in a meeting house chest. Historians still argue whether this shift was driven by pragmatism or principle. Did Quakers soften their punishments because larger settlements needed less control, or because their belief in redemption grew stronger? You're pondering this as you sit in the meeting house, the room fuller than before. Peter's case is resolved without fanfare. He's back on his bench, hatless, looking sheepish but unscathed. If you were in trouble, maybe for gossiping about a neighbor's trade deal, you'd face a similar private chat, not a silent stare down. You're picturing yourself, fumbling through an apology to one elder, the ordeal over faster than you expected. Let's set the scene. You're on a worn bench. The lanterns glow softer as evening settles. The elders, men and women, speak with a new calm, less about shame and more about restoration. Another quirky tidbit. Some meetings introduced mentoring as discipline, pairing offenders with a seasoned Quaker to guide them. You're envisioning Peter walking fields with an older woman who talks about simplicity while pointing out crops. It's not punishment. It's a lesson woven into daily life. Joke number 2. Quaker mentoring was like life coaching, but with more plain cloaks and fewer vision boards. You're starting to feel the change. As Quaker settlements grew, they faced fewer external threats. Puritans were less hostile, and trade brought stability. Their peculiar punishments didn't vanish, but they morphed, leaning on guidance over guilt. You're watching Peter blend back into the group, the meeting's rhythm unbroken. The old tools, stocks, fines, silence, are still there, but they're used sparingly, like relics of a harsher time. As you step outside, the air crisp with the promise of winter, you're ready to reflect on how these ideas, born in defiance, left a lasting mark on the world beyond the meeting house. You're in the late 1660s, standing in a Quaker meeting house in a bustling colonial settlement. The air soft with the scent of polished wood and fading autumn light. The Quakers' peculiar punishments, those strange blends of shame, silence, and fines, have evolved, softening into gentler guidance as their communities grow. Now, you're about to reflect on the lasting legacy of their justice, how their radical ideas from a turbulent era still echo in modern concepts like restorative justice. You're among them, feeling the weight of their history, ready to tie their story together before drifting into a calming close. Mainstream fact: Quaker principles of nonviolence and equality, rooted in their 1650s discipline, influenced modern restorative justice, which emphasizes healing over punishment. You're in a meeting, watching a woman, maybe Ruth, resolve a minor fault. Perhaps she spoke harshly to a neighbor. Instead of shaming, the elders suggest she help the neighbor with chores, a nod to community repair. You're struck by how this mirrors today's ideas. Fix the harm, don't just punish. The Quakers' focus on reflection and reconciliation, even in their stricter days, planted seeds for systems that prioritize dialogue over dungeons. Now, the quirky bit. Some Quaker groups kept legacy books, journals noting how punishments led to reform, like early case studies. Picture yourself flipping through one, seeing entries like Ruth, for sharp words, mended ties through labor. It's oddly bureaucratic for a group so spiritual. If you were Ruth, you'd be hauling water for that neighbor, your hands sore but your conscience lighter. Joke number 1. It's like writing a Yelp review for your own redemption arc. These records show how Quakers valued outcomes. Did the punishment heal the community? A mindset that modern restorative justice echoes, minus the gray cloaks. Historians still argue whether Quaker justice was a true precursor to modern systems or just a product of its time. Did their nonviolent discipline inspire today's reforms? Or were they too tied to 17th century faith? You're mulling this as you sit in the meeting house, the room warm with packed benches. Ruth's case feels small but significant, a reminder that Quakers saw punishment as a path to unity. If you slipped up, maybe by flaunting a shiny buckle, you'd face a similar task, not a silent stare down. You're imagining yourself, carrying firewood, feeling the group's trust slowly rebuild. Let's set the scene. You're on a familiar bench, the lantern's glow fading as night creeps in. The elders' voices are soft, guiding Ruth toward amends. Another quirky tidbit. Some Quakers ended punishments with a re-welcoming, a quiet moment where the offender was embraced back into the fold. You're picturing Ruth, her neighbor nodding as they share a task, the rift closing. Joke number 2. Quaker justice was like a group hug, but you had to earn it with chores. This focus on restoration, fixing relationships, not breaking spirits, carries forward, whispering in today's community circles and mediation programs. You're feeling the thread that ties it all together. The Quakers' peculiar punishments, born in defiance of a harsh world, were about survival and soul-saving. Their legacy lives in how we try to mend, not just mend fences, but hearts. As you step outside, the stars are bright, the settlement quiet, only a distant owl breaking the stillness. Wind down. Now, let's ease you toward sleep. Picture yourself leaving that meeting house, the cool night air brushing your face, carrying the faint scent of pine. The Quakers' world fades, their gray cloaks blending into the shadows. You're walking a soft path, each step slower, the crunch of leaves underfoot a gentle rhythm. Their story, of shame turned to healing, of silence turned to strength, settles in your mind, like a warm blanket pulled tight. Let the day's worries slip away, like coins dropped into that old Quaker finds box, no longer needed. You're safe here, in this moment, the stars above whispering calm. Breathe deeply, let your thoughts drift, soft as candlelight flickering out. Sleep is close, wrapping you in its quiet embrace, just as the Quakers wrapped their community in care. Rest now, and let the night carry you gently onward.